Well, I think we'll get started, folks. I'd like to introduce Jesse, Cody, and Steven. They're here to talk about object-based audio for musical theater. It's a relatively new concept, and I'm going to guess it's due in part to our new friend, Lisa. Is that right?
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Okay, thank you. Take it away, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm glad you all came out for this. We're excited to talk about this show because it was the first use of ELISA, L-Acoustics ELISA immersive audio environment in a musical theater scenario. So we were trying out a lot of things that we had all sort of talked about over the years that were interesting things we could maybe try and see how well they worked out. So I think we're glad to try it out on a show for once. So I got to use my fancy PowerPoint reveal one time. That's the only time I get to use that one. So the show is called Broadway Bounty Hunter, and it is a new musical by Joe Iconis, who also just did the Broadway musical Be More Chill. So he's sort of an up-and-coming and very prolific composer. I mean, I think there was 20, 30 songs in the show, it seemed like, and he does a lot of shows and a lot of things in development, so I think we'll be hearing more about him. Director was Jennifer Werner. The sound designer here to my left, Cody Spencer, the sound designer, and then to his left, Stephen P. Jensen, associate sound designer. As a running joke, I'm just going to refer to Stephen by all three names the entire time we're here. The mixer was Michelle Reese. Michelle Reese, who, a fantastic job. Of course, Cody stole her for the Mean Girls tour, so she can't mix anything else for a little while. So the show was at downtown at the Greenwich House Theater. So this is just off 7th Avenue South in the heart of the village. It was in the middle of the summer, so it did kind of smell like hot garbage pretty much all the time. But it's a historical old venue, and the theater itself is only 199 seats, so it was a sort of a fairly small black box. But it was good because it let us try out a fully immersive ELISA system. So for the system design, we started out with 5 X12 coaxial point source speakers. So this compromised our main scene system, right? So these 5 speakers were distributed across the width of the stage, hopefully being able to localize sounds to anywhere on the stage. We also added some SB15M subwoofers under the deck. Cody chose the 5XTs for front fills. We had 4 of those. And then we added 2 more 5XTs for near fills just off the proscenium for those very front areas. Balcony delays were 4 X8 loudspeakers. It was a very small balcony. It was what?
I think it was like 2 rows, maybe 16 people.
2 rows, about 16 people. During tech, it was like the producers sat up there, right? So we had to make sure that zone was really good so the producers weren't like, what is this crazy sound system that doesn't sound good? So the immersive system, we were able to add some surrounds in here. So on the sides of the venue are these 3 bay windows. So we chose to fit in there 5 XT loudspeakers, 1 in each bay. So that was 3 per side. For rear channels, we did 2. The interesting thing here is that we cloned those channels for under the balcony and over the balcony. So the under balcony left and right surrounds were the same feeds for both below and above the balcony, right? So what you're seeing here, this is our L-Acoustics Sound Vision software, all of these 3D bits. This right here is a mapping looking top down of the ELISA zone. So everything that's in the green zone there is the shared coverage of all 5 scene speakers in the ELISA zone. So that means anybody in that green zone was able to get fully localized sound from the main ELISA system. We in Sound Vision have a couple of metrics to look at this. So the first thing we look at is what percentage of the audience is in that coverage. In this case, we had 80% of the audience was in the shared and aligned coverage. So shared and aligned means that we're getting all 5 speakers within 6 dB and within 10 milliseconds of each other. So the idea being that we can place a sound in any loudspeaker across the zone, and everybody in this green zone is going to get a good representation of that sound. So very helpful to have this sort of mapping to sort of determine how well this system will work and optimize certain parameters about it to tweak it as best as possible. This also tells us that anybody in the yellow zone is maybe getting 1 speaker more than the other, and so not getting that within our tight parameters. And then the black zone is not covered by the frontal system here. So those areas where we needed to add fills. So this is why we had those 4 front fills and those 2 additional proscenium near fills to sort of really cover in robustly those areas. And then we took that speaker design and imported it into the Eliza controller software. This allows us to place the listener in the middle of this loudspeaker layout and interact with that in a way that made sense and was easy to use. So in this case, since we're looking at all the full range speakers only, so in this what you'll see is 5 of the main loudspeakers in front. You'll see all of the surrounds. What you don't see is there's no subwoofers or fills in this speaker layout. Those are treated as a separate send. And the rear surround channels you'll see instead of there's only 2 channels back there, even though we had 4 loudspeakers above and below. And then this is what it looks like in the Eliza controller. So this is actually where we will place the objects to mix with. And then we can outline the frontal system with this white square. That's just a quick visual indicator that we can place an object on stage if we're within this white box, right? So we know what's in the immersive system and what's not. And so here I'm going to toss this to Stephen to talk us through the infrastructure, the actual setup of the Eliza, the console and the Eliza system.
Yeah, so we had a CL3 as our mixing desk, Dante inputs and outputs going into a RM64 that turned it into a MADI stream that hit a MADI switch that gave us dual MADI streams that hit the main Eliza controller and then a backup Eliza controller. Both of those were running the show at the same time, outputting our outputs, and then fed that back into the MADI switcher. So at any point, if we needed to switch over to the backup on the MADI switcher, we could get that backup MADI stream. Then that fed into the MADI to analog converter, turned it into analog outputs, which then fed our LA4X amps.
So real quick, everything was running at 48K. So for the Eliza controller, it all runs over MADI. So at 48K, we're able to get 64 channels. This means we could do all inputs to the Eliza controllers and then output returns from the Eliza on single BNC. So one BNC cable carried all of the MADI from the console to the Eliza and the switching, and then one BNC cable was then the return, which allowed it to be converted to analog outputs from there. So we tried to keep it 48K, 64 channels to fit it under just that one cable. And then for the controller, we had the Eliza controller. This is running on a separate computer that controls the objects via the Eliza processor. And then everything was sort of controlled via QLab. So here's where I'll let Stephen again jump in about how we use QLab to control this stuff.
Yeah, QLab was the central brain of all of our show control. It was the queuing for the CL3. We had a CL1 monitor desk that was getting recalled by QLab. QLab was receiving triggering from lighting, and QLab was also controlling the Eliza controller through OSC. The great thing about that was the OSC recall for Eliza is pretty simple, and so we wrote hotkey scripting so that Cody could be working on whatever he needed to do with sound effects and programming. Jesse and I could bang out all the Eliza scenes that we needed, and then right before running something, we could jump into QLab, program all of our Eliza cues in about 10 seconds, and be ready to go. So we weren't interrupting Cody's workflow within QLab while we were working on creating these Eliza scenes.
Yeah, so because we were using the Eliza snapshot engine to do all the movements of the objects, having everything centrally located via QLab was really helpful because it was sort of the hub, right? It sent cues to the desk, it sends cues to Eliza, it dealt with cues coming in from lighting and projections, and then Stephen, as he said, had written these little scripts, so instead of having to type a message in QLab to recall a certain snapshot, he had a hotkey that just would bring up a dialog box and he would say cue number 2, and it would be for Eliza. So it was a really, really quick and easy process, and it was all sort of centrally located in QLab. So in terms of the show and inputs, so it was a 9-person cast, so 9 actors. They played a variety of roles from lead to ensemble and stripper. And they were using a couple strippers. They were using point source headsets on Sennheiser SK5212 body packs. And it was an immersive show, right? It's a small house. So there were entrances from the house. There were scene moments that happened with actors that were placed around the house. And so it was really important for us to be able to localize the voices of those actors to wherever they were and wherever they were entering from. And from as far as the band goes, it was a rock and funk score. So it was sort of 70s New York City exploitation funk music. It's a 6-piece band. I think, how many players were there?
It was 6 players. It was 6 players total. Yeah.
So 6 players, but they played a bunch of instruments. So there was drums, keys, guitar, bass, flute, tenor sax, bari sax, and then shakuhachi. God bless you.
Most important instrument in the show.
It had a very mystical flute sound.
It was very mystical. Yes.
The band was also located just off the stage left, right? So the drummer was right there. All the band was like stacked really, really close off stage. So we had to be very cognizant. Cody and Steven did a great job of isolating the band so we didn't hear a ton of natural sound coming out in the house and destroying the mix. We were able to sort of keep that minimal and then also get the show loud enough. Yeah. So just a quick primer on Eliza. So we have the system, we have the inputs, we have all that stuff. So now what can we do with those objects? So there's 5 parameters in Eliza that we can use. The first one is panorama. So this is where an object is placed in the horizontal domain around the room. So where is the object in the space? And then we have width. So width is how wide an object appears. So it can appear as with 0 width, it can appear as sort of a point source, or you can add width to it and it can sort of take up more speakers and appear as a wider object. Distance is also a really interesting one. So distance in Eliza is a 3-part algorithm. The first one is it gives you level and then also high frequency attenuation. So as an object moves far away from you in Eliza, much like it will in real life, it'll get a little quieter, it will have a little less high end. And then the third thing it does is it excites the room engine a little bit. So that room engine is activated as an object goes into distance. There was an aux send per channel as well on the objects done in Eliza. This we use only for subwoofer send. The elevation is also a parameter we can use. In this case, we did not use it for this production. To use elevation, you need loudspeakers above your head. We didn't have that. We already had 30 loudspeakers in a room this size, so we thought that was maybe enough. And then, of course, there's mix downs in Eliza as well. So the mix downs, we set it so that anything that was within the scene system, so anything that was on stage would go to the mix downs, and that was front fills, near fills, the balcony fill, any other fills we would have needed. Real quick look at the Eliza room engine. So this is a customizable room engine, and as I said, it's activated as you apply distance to an object. And it's also localized to the object. So as an object moves around in space, its early and late reflections are traveling with the object in whatever arrangement we've sent. So whether we have the early reflections near the object and the late reflections far away, as an object moves around as it would in real life, it excites the space as if it were in a real room. It was also recallable by snapshots. You see here we had sort of one that we used for everything and then one that was just dry, like totally off, so we could turn it off if we wanted to. So I'll let Cody jump in here and talk about the band.
So with the band being on stage, upstage of the cast, or kind of off stage of the cast, we played with how we were doing this a lot. It took us a little bit of time to figure out how we wanted to do this, and what we learned is spacing them out in the stage parameters really made them feel part of the show as opposed to feeling a distant. And then is the next one drums? Yeah. And then our drums, because our drummer was on stage, that was the one thing we really couldn't control. We tried a lot. We really sourced the drums and tried to blend in the drums, and the drums are very natural sounding. When we were at a low level, at a loud level, we were able to really push and crank the drums, and it sounded really good, but it felt like you were sourcing back to the drum kit as opposed to just kind of being in the room. What's next? And then, and the basic guitars, we took the plane of the stage and tried to kind of spread it out so we weren't just exactly sourced to where they are, but to kind of fill in the image. Because it was almost like a movie feel to the show. So you were going in and out of underscoring. You have these big moments that kind of, go straight into smaller moments. So we really like to play with the band and make them nice and full. So you see our keys and our guitars and bass off to the side, and then next our keys kind of spread out. In stereo pairs, so we're able to do the width to make them spread more or less and really be able to play with where they were. And again, this is all of our bass setting. We had a couple of different settings for when different things happened in the show, but kind of having and setting the bass setting of the band and then kind of that being your starting point and going back and forth was really useful to kind of get some really creative stuff with the band. What else do we have? And then, just our reeds and our flutes and our bari sax and our trumpet. And
I don't think I have shakuhachi in here right now.
You don't have shakuhachi in there. That is the most important thing, is the shakuhachi. But that was just downstage center all the way wide to really encompass the room. So,
Yeah, so in terms of localizing for the band, so we talked about the band, right? They're offstage left. So Cody started grouping the drums, which were the loudest acoustic instrument, sort of trending in that way, but also trying to drag that image back across the stage. So localization is really a key here, right? In theater, if you're seeing someone talk on stage and you're off to the side of the room and all of a sudden there's a speaker in front of you, the person's like over here and the sound is coming from here, it's very disconnected. So one of the main benefits of ELIZA is being able to localize objects to where they are on stage. So for actors, this is a huge deal. The only downside here is that we didn't have any trackers. So because we didn't have trackers tracking the people around in real time, we had to find ways to make that work, either in queuing, or in this case, we used a little bit of width of an object, so we had a bit more wiggle room, right? So we lose a little bit of that point source localization, but by adding a little bit of width, we able to expand on that localization for everybody else in the house. And here's an example of a lead singer doing a song and having some width on it, and then if, say, they made a blocking change, that object would, on a snapshot that was timed, the mixer would take a snapshot, the object would move over to their location on stage. I think the thing we found is that the localization was so good that if it broke by just a little bit, it sounded really unnatural, right? So once we had that localization that was so great, as soon as it was off by a little bit, you really noticed it. So we ended up having a lot of cues.
Yeah, we ended up adding a lot more cues than we ever thought we were going to add, because we were like, oh yeah, we can just do this and they'll take their time. But it really was, the mixer, Michelle, was very on top of being exactly where they are and knowing exactly what each cue did. Again, this is a little, with trackers, we would be able to negate a lot of this, but it was really noticeable anywhere you sat in the house. If we were in the wrong cues, all of a sudden the voice is popping to the other side of the stage, and you're like, wait, why is it there? So we spent a lot of time really queuing out and with the blocking and really making sure we're following where the actors were.
Yeah, it was also important because it's a small house, right? So you're hearing a lot of acoustic energy from the actors anyway. Even in a loud moment, you're hearing their natural voice. So that reinforcement being locked to somewhere near that natural voice was really, really important. So we had to really make sure we were on it with that. We're just going to take through a couple of techniques that we had conceived of beforehand, and we were like, great, let's see how this works out. One of the ones that I've sort of just said in general for a while, actually this one was Cody's idea, I got ahead of myself. So this is the beginning of the show.
So the very beginning of the show, the band is rocking out. It's just a huge, big funk number, slapping bass, heavy guitars, heavy horns, and the actors walking in from the back of the house and going up to the stage, as you see here. So it starts out all in the house, sound is completely encompassing you, and then as she gets on stage, she hits a note. She hits her first note, we just snap in. And you did your part? Oh, there it goes. And again, it looks like a slow snap, but the band has actually stopped playing for a second. It snaps in, and then she starts the song, and the band is centralized to her. She's centralized on stage, and we're not in the encompassing sound. We're actually focusing on stage, and it kind of helped pull the direction towards the stage, but also show that we had this full encompassing thing and prepare the audience for the fact that there is going to be actors in the house. There is going to be a lot of things happening around you in the house, but the focus is up on the stage. So the director really liked this effect we did at the very top of the show.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we start to see some of the new creative possibilities you can do with something like this. When you have a system that can accomplish all this stuff, you can now play with space, right? So starting the show with a really big, wide panorama of the band, and then as the song starts with the actor, the band starts to close in to be on stage, right? So it becomes more part of the world. So we're now able to play with a different dimension of sound just by doing this little bit. And I think we found that those sort of things were like a hugely improvement to the show.
Yeah, they were really useful especially when actors were in the audience. We were doing transition stuff, and actually we were distracting from the fact that they shouldn't be looking at the stage. We would move the actors all around, and then also bring the band back around, and that would make it so you're encompassing. You're kind of looking around and seeing the elements around you, as opposed to focusing on the quick change happening on stage or something like that. So we definitely utilized that a lot in the moving around a little bit to really help draw focus.
And also for moments, in big instrumental moments during specific numbers, instead of just having a louder band, we were able to get a more immersive band during certain musical breaks throughout the show.
Yeah. And it was lucky that the show lent itself to that, right? Like, it's a small theater, there's people entering from the house. You know, we don't see the band, so we can play with this wideness or narrowness because we're not matching them to a visual. We're able to sort of do whatever we want. So this is just a look of what we would do typically sometimes with a song. So this is the lead actor in the front, and then behind them is all the people singing background. In this case, we used some width. We localized the people as to where they were on stage, and then applied width, so they sounded like a cohesive ensemble. But again, we use that distance effect, and that distance effect really let the lead singer sort of stand forward and the background singer sort of sit more in the background, which again is like a different creative tool versus just, say, having a level difference or having maybe the ensemble compressed. It gives us an additional creative outlet to try to play with that space between lead and backgrounds. And then this is if we're adding the band to that picture. So this is the vocals, and then here's where the band objects would be, so that we see where the whole picture comes together for a typical song. And this is a band. This is ensemble in the surrounds moment.
Yeah. So we had a lot of times where we were focusing on the lead singing, and we kind of just wanted to encompass, because I don't know which scene this is, but whether it be the fact that we actually have the cast members in the audience, or they're actually singing off stage. We would kind of make them encompass the room to really get the energy up that this is, that you're part of this is happening. And then our lead would be downstage center singing, and then by encompassing around, it's still giving you the focus, but the vocals are almost acting as instruments at this moment to kind of add texture, and by having the texture around you, it really helps focus on the person center stage, and it was really a nice, a couple of nice moments like that.
Yeah, when we could do it, it worked really well. I mean, we're playing with space. There's a lot of moments in the show, so the times that it made sense for ensemble to be surrounding you, whether they were in the house or they were on stage and we wanted it to sound like they were in the house, this was a nice thing that we could accomplish. So this is the one that I was saying before that it was the first thing when I started working with Eliza. I was like, this is great, because now when we do an underscoring moment in theater, typically the band will strip out some instrumentation, maybe they'll hold back a bit, maybe we'll pull the band fader back a bit, and that's how we get the dialogue over the band, right? So with Eliza now, we can use this distance to move the band backwards. So in this case, it was an underscoring moment where the band could just be pushed in the distance, and that allowed the people in the foreground to be in the foreground to have their dialogue moment, and the band to sort of push back. And then when the song resumed, the band then, of course, comes back into the foreground. So now we were able to play with that third dimension of how we do that. So it gives us a new tool to accomplish like an old theater.
Yeah, and actually our music department actually enjoyed this and didn't strip as much out. As typical, what would happen is you're having underscoring issues where you can't get the vocals on top. They would just start taking instruments out. But by doing this, we were able to just push it far back, and then the high end goes down. We get a little bit of the room on there, engine on there, and then the delay, and it really just kind of makes it tuck. You're still hearing everything. It's just not as defined, and it's just a little bit there, kind of underscore. And then when it pops back into the song, just how much of an effect that has. That it's not changing orchestration. It's not changing anything. We're just pushing it back, pulling it forward, and our music department loved us for that one.
Yeah. So there's. I think in the past people have tried to do something similar, but now it's all sort of in this environment we're already using and making cues in. So it wasn't difficult for us to try and do that to a separate set of speakers upstage or do any sort of crazy bussing. It literally was grab the band objects, push them back, and restore that snapshot, and then make a crossfade. So the workflow was incredibly easy to be able to accomplish something like that. This is a sound effect montage at the beginning of the show. I think we're smiling because I think we had to strip it back over time. I think it got a little bit, but it was a cityscape sort of thing.
Yeah, so it was a cityscape just to kind of, the show starts and it's like you're in the rough city, you're in like 70s New York, and it's like rough and tough. And so we had this idea of just making a really realistic cityscape that really sounded like it was actually happening in the room, and to the point that we had to cut it way back because it was giving people anxiety that they were sitting out on the street and that it was like something bad was going to happen at any moment. So we actually cut it back and made it a little bit simpler. But the fact that we were able to do this effect where it's, I don't know if you see, but it's slowly moving. So we're kind of slowly making objects move all the time. There's a couple objects that actually pass at different times, but I think that's a couple cues down from there.
Yeah.
But what the big key thing is here is that the fact that, we were tight on channel count, so we ended up only doing 6 QLab channels, which I know a lot of people are like, 6 QLab channels, that's not much at all. But we didn't really need a lot of QLab channels, because usually if you have like one QLab channel per an output, whereas this, I would just take an object and then trigger it via QLab and also trigger Eliza's at the same time, and able to move and do all the movement I need in Eliza and not have to worry about doing all this crazy QLab programming. And it worked out very well. There's a lot of really cool movement effects we were able to do very easily that would have taken a lot more programming in QLab, or really just Eliza, we just timed it all together, and it was really, really simple. And it made the workflow very easy for doing a lot of object-based movement when it came to QLab.
Yeah, and this was a lot of cityscape sound effects as well, and a lot of those can be sort of just white noise that's happening and you're hearing stuff. So the idea that Cody had, which worked really well, is that we sort of put the ambiances around the room and then we would slowly rotate it, right? So it sort of felt like the room was sort of changing slowly over time, so it didn't feel just like a static, noisy room. So it was really, really cool because you would have this slow rotation of sounds, and then you would hear maybe a car drive by playing the music of the show, like out of its car stereo, and I mean, it was a really cool effect until
until it got cut.
Until it got cut. So overall, the big benefits for Eliza, localization was pretty good.
Localization was really useful, especially in a small space, like Jesse was saying. The fact that 9 times out of 10 you could hear the voice acoustically as well, and we wanted to stay true to where that acoustic voice is coming from. If at a typical left, right, center system, you're just going to have a wall of sound and you're never really going to localize and source. Whereas this, we were able to really easily be like, oh, they're over there, boom, and like just really quickly and easily. Again, we did have a lot of cues to program that in, but really easily be able to put them where they are and actually make this little tiny room sound very natural for the smaller moments and then really big for the bigger moments, and it worked out very well.
Yeah, so one of the other benefits of Eliza is more resolution, right? Instead of having 1 or 2 speakers, like a dual mono or maybe a pseudo stereo system, now you have 5 speakers and then some, so we can place objects in them. So each speaker doesn't have to work as hard. So the mix all of a sudden sat a lot better. Everything sort of had its place. Each speaker was doing its own job. So the resolution was really good. So we had really, really clear, punchy sound where we needed it.
And in addition to the resolution being great, the fact that you have, your frontal system's 5 speakers, a couple times we had actors singing directly in each other's face, and we all know when you have actors singing directly in each other's face, going through one speaker, you're going to get phasing. Whereas this, we would just spread it out enough so that one actor is in one speaker, the other actor is in the other speaker, and able to turn it up and have 0 phasing, and just the fidelity was just super crystal clear. When in traditional systems, you would be having complete phasing, and mixer would hate you, everyone would sound like crap, the director would want to reblock it, but we were able to just spread it out. That's certain times we needed to do that. And it lends to the multiple speakers, the resolution. The same thing with the band, just being able to not muddy up coming out of a left and right, just to really come out across the whole band of 5 speakers. It really made the system work very efficiently, and I think it just sounded
Yeah,
great.
I mean, I forget that typically an AB system in theater is a great thing. You basically have 2 speakers for every position, and then when you have 2 actors singing, you have one routed to speaker A and one routed to speaker B, and that way those voices don't interact at all, right? There's no summing electronically until they get out of the speaker. So all of a sudden that comb filtering phasing is reduced dramatically. But with Eliza, without having to have dual speakers everywhere, those 2 signals are completely not touching each other until they get out of the speaker, as long as they're not in the exact same only speaker. So we get a lot of these benefits of keeping the signal separated, sort of like an AB system, without having to have an AB system in place. So that was a huge bit. And then again, the one that I think I was really excited about is the new creative possibilities, new ways to solve the old problems of underscoring, or the workflow of being able to just take an object and place it where it is and have it be there and have it work, without having to sort of try things out. Like, what other creative things do we think were new?
Again, just the way that I thought about QLab and sound effect playback is completely different now. Like, I want to be able to just move objects around. I don't want to be able to have to spend forever doing this crossfade and just really okay, if I do this crossfade, oh great, that's wrong, now I got to go back and do it. But this was just by linking OSC to Eliza, just to be able to hit go and then have this object do whatever I needed to, or have multiple objects moving in opposite directions, or we had a lot of random different things we did. It just made my approach to QLab is different now. If I ever get to use, if I get to use Eliza, when I get to use Eliza again, I have many ideas that that I've learned from this, but it changes the approach, but in a positive way, because it makes the time I'm spending programming is less. Like, I spent so much less time programming actual physical QLab cues because I was able to move things around how I wanted to without having to do cross-point fades and all these crazy things. So it's very, and then also with the band, just the way that we spread the band, and like, I'm very intrigued to do this again with having a band that, I hate to say it, but it's completely covered and completely isolated, because the things we could do with that, it would just be, mind-blowing to be able to really play with that and do movement and stuff like that.
I mean, technology is sort of nothing if you can't use it well, right? So in this case, being able to have this quick workflow where you can just accomplish what you're doing very quickly and have it be reliable. I mean, for me, when I conceive of sounds, I conceive of them in this way, where what things are in the foreground, what things are off to the side of me, panorama, what things are in the distance, how they might move, right? So now this is the easiest way to just get those ideas out and have them work in the real world. And to me, that's the real benefit here, is not only the better sound quality and the localization and the creative possibilities, but being able to accomplish the things that you're conceiving quickly and easily, right? And then, of course, we got to talk about the acoustic sound quality, because we're the best. Sounds great. System sounded great, so it could be really big and punchy and rocking out, or it could be nice and subtle and gentle and everything in between. It was really good.
And I guess I'll also like to point out, like, what my experience with acoustic speakers, and I've used them a lot, is the fact that I had actors walking in front of speakers, and we, knock on wood, we didn't really ever have feedback much. No, like, the acoustic, the how stable the high end is, you can just literally, an actor with that, it's a headset mic, so it's not a boom mic, a lav, but the fact that we had actors walking right in front of speakers, and we were open at full, and it sounded just fine. There was no feedback. There, everything was great, and just in the fidelity and like the low end response that we had in that room with, what do we have, 15s? Yeah.
12s, X12s.
Yeah, the X12s and then the 15-inch subs. Like, it felt like we had much more low end in that room than we actually had.
Oh yeah.
And it sounded really good, and we could really rock it. And it was just such a great sounding system with the small amount of boxes we had.
Yeah, we had a good time. We do want to thank two quick, they weren't really say sponsors per se, but we were big into the Recess CBD seltzer at the time. There was a pop-up shop that was down the street, and I went there one day and came back with like a beach umbrella and something else.
All of the goodies. And a circle towel, because the circle towel is really important.
But this allowed me and Cody to stay very relaxed so that Steven could do all the work.
Yeah, stay out of my way.
And then, of course, our official sponsor is the Spaniard at 190 West 4th Street down in the corner. This was our dinner spot. This was our after-tech drinks spot. And they had free pens and bar napkins. So when we were talking about these ideas and let's try this tomorrow, we could sort of grab stuff and sketch it out. So thanks to the Spaniard. So that's what we got. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask about object-based audio, about the show? Anything? Yeah? Do we have any audio? We don't, actually.
Unfortunately, we do not have any audio.
I think there's some online for sure.
Yeah,
There's definitely promo videos.
If you look up Broadway Bounty Hunter, there's a couple YouTube videos and stuff out there that exist from the show. Unfortunately, the show is closed since, but it's a great show. The score is amazing. I don't know if Annie Golden was the lead in the show. She was phenomenal. Our whole cast was amazing. The band was amazing. It was such a good time, and we had such good content coming at us to recreate, to put out there with this system. It was great. So.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
So in this theater, the audience was congregated in kind of one solid block. How would you adapt an object-based approach for like an aisle staging or situations where audience is not necessarily concentrated in one place?
Yeah, I mean, there was an aisle down the center, mostly for entrances of people and stuff, but it was basically 2 blocks left and right of the house. The approach is sort of the same in the way that the ELISA system, the frontal system specifically, is meant to create that big ELISA zone for anybody in that space. So effectively, we're ignoring that there's no people down the center of the room, and we're trying to get everybody in that zone, right? We're trying to make that zone as big as possible to encompass as many people as possible. If it was a bigger room, we would have made maybe bigger speakers or adjusted the panorama of the speakers a bit to try and maximize that zone for whatever audience interaction we had. But yeah.
Thanks for describing everything. It's actually really inspirational too. Did you do any, split for multi-tracking or anything like that regarding archiving, taking MADI channels, doing any kind of mapping along those lines?
Yeah, we definitely did that. this show we did not have the resources to do playback. In future shows, I would definitely have the resources to do playback to really fine tune everything. But we did do a recording just for reference for us to play with in the studio at a later point, just to kind of see. But in theory, we would definitely be able to do a MADI record, MADI stream, and then do playback of that to really fine tune the programming, which I would have loved to do. But unfortunately, on this one, we did not have the budget for a MADI recorder.
I think we're also maxed out on our MADI stream.
We definitely were maxed out on our MADI
Using every
stream.
bit
I
of
had
it.
a lot more ideas that these two said I couldn't do because I didn't have enough channels. So, well, mainly this guy, but because we ran out of channels. But but in theory, yes, you could definitely do that on multiple mixing consoles. I'm sure you could figure out a way to do that. And it would be very, very useful, especially with OSE cues, because really you're just checking how the movement's working and making sure location's staying. And I've even done stuff like that with video attached to it as well to make sure we have the blocking correct and stuff like that. But unfortunately on this one, we didn't get it that. Next time.
The one thing I don't think I pointed out is that the console was feeding all these objects it was post fader. So post fader direct outs. So as the mixer is still mixing and throwing lines, so it's post fader, post processing. So on the desk, we're still using EQ, compression, faders, all that stuff was still being used just as you normally would on a desk. Just instead of going out to a stereo bus or a mono bus, it's going into Eliza as direct outs. I think I may have skipped that part, but that was really key.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Here we go.
Hi, how much extra tech time did it take to work out the details of the system?
0. We
Really?
had no extra tech time. We spent it was a non-union house, so we got a little extra time in that aspect. But no, we had no extra tech time. We had no extra time with the cast, no extra time with the band. We had the typical time, and then less than I would have liked because it was an off-Broadway production. So I had a quarter of the time that I would typically have for a Broadway production. But yeah, we again, it was a lot of, okay, let's rough this in, and then during runs, Jesse and Steven paying attention to things while I'm listening to things as well, and then fine-tuning as we went. And it was a lot, even to the last preview, even the day before we had press there, I was still making adjustments just to really get it tuned in. But yeah, no, we had no extra time, but the ease of use, it actually didn't really need the extra time. As long as in the very beginning, we were kind of like figuring out, okay, what do we do? And then we finally figured it out. And then the workflow was really simple, really easy. I would have notes of what I wanted. I'd give them to Steven. Steven would help put them in. And like sometimes once these guys both left me and I was by myself, I had no clue what I was doing. But I was able to put things in and add cues and make adjustments. But it really worked out really well. But yeah, there was 0 extra time. I wish I had more time.
I mean, it was really simple to be able to take an object and just place it where they were. So if Cody was working on something, maybe at the console, and Steven's working on something else, and there's a pass happening of a song, it's really easy just to place the people where they are, and then he could say, hey, can we try the band really big, and then it snaps down to the stage on a cue, and very quickly I could grab the band group, make it extra wide, make a snapshot, and then make another snapshot with it here, and then just hit a crossfade. And so like the workflow was super simple. So yeah, again, no one's going to give us extra time to work on sound, even in the best scenario. Certainly not in this case.
It was honestly easier than I expected. I expected it to be much worse, but it's just the flow and Steven's programming and QLab and just how we made it so it was really simple. It's really, really intuitive and really great to work with.
Yeah, think about if we're doing sound effects. We're like, oh, we got to have a telephone ring. Where's the telephone on stage? There it is, and we place the object there. Oh, it's a little too close. Let's add some distance. Okay, done. So there was no having to rethink. It was actually more intuitive than trying to say, okay, it's going to come out QLab 6 and a little bit at a QLab 7, and let's do the fade between this look to that look. It was way easier actually to do it this way and just say 2 objects that go from here to over here on a fade time of 3.
The other great thing is getting new pages, getting line changes. Our mixer was spending time catching up with the programming just as new things came in every day. So things like pushing the band a little bit further back, we could do that and not have to get in on the console, and so we're not stacked up trying to use the same piece of equipment or work in the same area. We were able to push a lot of that onto Eliza. We had a moment where the lead sort of discovers that she still has this incredible singing voice, and it's this huge moment, and it comes out into the house, and it encompasses the whole audience, and so we had set up some sends on the console as just sort of special sauce, and we were able to build a couple of different options for Cody while other things were happening. And every time we ran that, we could try a different thing that we had built, and Cody could note that, and then as things were paused, we could rebuild these scenes. So having the ability to do the job sort of on different computers and in different ways, I think sped up the workflow.
Yeah.
And definitely kept sort of the normal roadblocks or sort of funnel points in a workflow from happening.
You've dipped into it a little bit talk about real-time changes, right? So this is highly scripted. So interactions with Lisa, if there's something that comes off script or a little bit improv, so to speak, or in a live band situation where you've got a guitar player that does a little bit of an unexpected solo and you've got that object placed somewhere else. How is that interaction? And Jesse, this may be more for you on what happens in those moments when it is. Do you have bailout scenes, or how does that work?
I mean, no. If we didn't like where something was, you grab the object and move it with your mouse. So if someone was, and that's live. It's totally live in real time.
And you can update it right then and say I want it that time every time, or you just take to the next cue and it won't update, and next time you get to that, it'll be back to where it's supposed to be. So you can easily just grab a mouse, do it, and in certain applications, with Digico for sure, you can actually, it's built into the scene memory. So you can do it, and you could grab it and change it, and then if you don't hit store, you're going to go to the next scene. Next time you hit that scene, it's still going to be back to where you initially had it, but it's all live, real time. The thing we're talking about, the scripting, was making the OSC commands in the queuing really quick. That's where we spent a lot of time scripting to make that really quick. But the object base, it's just grab and go, and we can move or change anything and just do it and then save it or not save it, and it will revert back to what it was.
Yeah, we could take the band and like put it behind us and put it really far away and be like, "How's that work?" No, that's terrible, and we wouldn't save it, and then we just take a cue and it's back to where it should be.
Yeah.
How many cues in Eliza was it for this entire show?
Well, I can tell you.
He's got.
'Cause I have the file right here. If I can find it.
No clue, actually.
Okay. Oh, let me exit this first, and then I can do this. Actually, have the file right here. And what's great about the Eliza controller is that you can use it offline, right? So you can prep your show, build your show, make groups, move things around, cue things. The only thing that you don't have is an actual processor to process the audio. So you can do all this stuff ahead of time. To answer your question, this is the snapshot list here in Eliza. Now there are a bunch that are, oh, it's not. Okay, sorry, it's not here. How about, no, I don't think it's working. Hang on a second.
Steven.
Wait. Oh wait, I wanted to duplicate. There we go. Okay, so here is the Eliza controller. I have these little drawers I can pull out. So here's the main playground, right? And those are all of our objects. We have the sources here where we can look at all of the inputs to the show. And I'm in visual solo mode here now. So if I grab QLab 4, for example, that's where QLab 4 is in that scene, or the hi-hat. Groups list, so we have the band, we have vocals, we had lead vocals, we had ensemble vocals, some QLab inputs. For snapshots, so you can number them whatever you want. These are just OSC ID on the left side and all the names of them. I think we're around.
Yeah, I want to say we're around 100 because we kind of jumped in. We went to 200s for a while.
Right.
We kind of jumped around, but I would say around 100. And if I had more time, there probably would have been 200 or 300. But we definitely time got us on this one. But again, I think we had a really great sounding show, and is a really good example of what Eliza could do. And it was like, now I want to do it again, and I have 1,000 other ideas that, and like how to use this. And now that we've done it once, it's really interesting to check it out. So.
And I think the important thing to note is because of the timing flexibility that we have on how we program the recall of these cues, these weren't 100 additional cues for the mixer to take. There were places where we could shift the timing on it a little bit so that it would land with a cue that the mixer was already taking. So it's not 100 additional cues on top of the mixer's normal workload.
That was actually the first thing. We'd be like, "Hey, Stephen, we need a new Eliza cue," and he'd be like, "Hey, Michelle, is there a cue here already?" No. Okay, well, we need to add one, right? Or, yes, I have a cue at this point. Okay, great. With QLab, we can take the desk cue and the Eliza cue and put them in the same group. So now one button press on the console does 5 different things, right? Anybody else? Cool. Again, I'm Jesse, Cody, Steven. If you guys have any questions, we'll be around. L Acoustics demo room is downstairs, 1E02, if you want to check us out. Hope you're having a good AES. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.